Agencies across government are using artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies to respond to the pandemic and meet other missions. But those technologies could turn into vulnerabilities themselves. Chris Cummiskey is the CEO of Cummiskey Strategic Solutions, former acting undersecretary at the Department of Homeland Security. Chris, it's great to see you again. What are you looking at, and what are other organizations tracking, which technologies specifically, as potential vulnerabilities?
Well, thanks for having me. Essentially, what DHS has done of late is take a look at emerging threats on the landscape as it relates to technology. And as a result of that, they've identified 6 or 7 categories that deserve further study and focus. AI is one of them, as you mentioned. Also looking at unmanned aerial systems, 3D printing, biogenetics are just some of the areas where the Homeland Security Advisory Council is really taking a deep dive as to what these emerging threats mean to the homeland.
What are the potential threats? Is it just the bad guys hacking into these things, making them do things they're not supposed to do? Or is it more complicated, more complex, and more severe than that?
Well, as you would expect, there's some real benefits of using things like AI and machine learning to create better efficiencies and better analytical capability, predictive technologies in government. But at the same time, your adversaries are using the same kinds of strategies. And so with AI, the UAS is really a euphemism for drone technologies in many cases. It's looking at what the Secret Service or CBP at the border are contending with as it relates to the threat of drones being more prolific and also inexpensive for those adversaries to use.
What kinds of things are they finding? What are the potential use cases for the bad guys that we need to think about defending against?
Well, in each category, there are these things that they've identified as potential threats. For AI, it's really this ability to distort, the reality of what the public is seeing through things like deep fake technology, which allows you to morph individuals to recreate images and videos to make it look like somebody is saying something different than perhaps what they said, to stoke fear, and then use that through a social media campaign, which we saw a little bit of in 2016. For UAS, it's payload delivery, the ability to deliver explosives or other harmful payloads to incidents where there are large crowds. 3D printing, it's the ability to build metal objects, guns, weapons through the use of 3D. And then for things like genetic mutation, it's that biogenetic arena they're concerned about with the permutations to livestock, and also to harm humans as a result of those changes.
Each of these categories that you described, Chris, sounds to me like it's a separate and discrete silo almost. I don't know that I can think of much connection between biometric mutation and 3D printing. Is there, though, an overarching framework of strategic thought to apply that works for all of these things as you try to think about how to neutralize these potential threats?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what the government is trying to do is assemble this threat landscape as it emerges in the future and really take a look at the things that are most likely to be harmful to the American public and things that they need to counter. And so these were 6 categories that the HSAC identified initially. And what you're seeing is that they're coming out with plans and recommendations over a 3 to 7 year horizon so that they can start to look at these individually and say, okay, for unmanned aerial systems, as they become much more sophisticated, what does that mean for large gatherings in the U.S. and what kinds of countermeasures would have to be developed?
I want to talk about the recommendations in a moment, but it sounds to me like what you're talking about the examining the threat landscape is a textbook example of a use case for the risk management framework that your former colleague at DHS, Raphael Boris, instituted. Am I on the right track?
Very much so. And you're seeing that work continue through the National Risk Management Center, in the cyber agency at DHS, and across the components. It's really this notion of, what is the risk to the American people, and then prioritizing that. Because if you look at the national risk assessments, they can have as many as 55 major categories, but you really do need to prioritize that. And I think that's what Bob Kolaski and the folks at CISA are trying to do now, is take that initial work from a series of years ago and then really apply it in the real world today.
Among the categories that you talked about, you didn't mention cyber, which is an issue you and I have talked about many times. Is it because that's attached to so many of these other things through various methods, or is there something else there?
No, I think you're right. It's really embedded. I think that really when the people at DHS and the federal agencies think about threat, they see that cyber is really ingrained across all of those different horizons. So you really do see that as kind of a baseline consideration in just about every technology project now.
All right, recommendations in the couple of minutes that we have left, Chris. What are you seeing as far as the way that DHS should take action? And what's the role potentially for industry to help the agency and other agencies deal with these emerging threats when they're using these technologies?
Well, I think you highlight a good point because the Department of Defense through the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center is really out in front in having a system of examination and analysis. The federal civilian agencies are not quite as far down that track. So one of the recommendations is for DHS and others to really start to centralize that thinking and have a conversation that will be inclusive of their different mission sets. So that's one area that I think is important for them to focus on. And certainly the counter drone technologies, whether it's signal jamming, sensor technologies, or through the FAA Authorization Act of 2018, it gives DHS the ability to use kinetic involvement to try and take some of these drones and other UASs out of the sky. And so that's going to be a much more complicated kind of discussion going forward.
Chris, thanks very much as always. Great to have you on this program.
Thanks, Francis.